This might be for life. Yeah. This might be for life. Stand up when the chief is here. Hands up. Yeah, the chief is here. Stand up when the chief is here. Hands up. Yeah, the chief is here. Yeah, this might be for life.
And it's Friday afternoon. Welcome everybody to our S Group S-Vest webinar. And it seems pretty obvious to all of us that certain things are happening remote, certain things are happening online. The whole world is going online. I do 27 Zoom calls a day, as I'm sure you do. But why not medicine? Why can't I just, hold my toe up, call my podiatrist, I got that right, and say, what's wrong with my toe? Why do I have to actually go there with a sore toe? I mean, it just makes sense, and it does, and there's a reason. So welcome all. We have our amazing Dorian Prostochemy, who's going to lead this, and two great guest stars here. We've got Vianney Mhlomi, who has an unbelievable CV. He's a doctor, and he's got Oxford Rhodes Scholarship, grew up in a township, Oxford Rhodes Scholar, unbelievable. This guy is something else. And the amazing Martin Diggle, who you met on Monday, who is... he's the medical and analyst and investor to the stars. He's also a friend of mine and a neighbor and has a very racy moustache. On that note, I'm going to jump off and Dorian is going to introduce our guest speaker, Robert Cowell. See you later.
Thanks, Rob. So as you can all see, we brought in the brains today because neither Rob and I had the knowledge on the sector. So we brought in two specialists. So thanks, Vianney, and thanks, Martin, for coming on. So it gives me a great pleasure today to introduce you to the founder and CEO of CloudDX, Robert Cowell. Listen, you all know what's going on with this pandemic. It's created a huge amount of stress on the hospitals, who are literally, in some cases, beyond capacity. Hospital staff are at risk. And this company offers a solution, which Robert Cowell will introduce to you in a second. Just before I pass it over to Robert, I should just mention that the company will be listing on the Canadian exchange in about 3 to 4 months' time. They are doing a pre-IPO financing of up to $10 million. Anyone who's interested in that, the company is doing a discount to the listing price of 20%. If you are interested, contact me or Rob or any of the Smartbee team directly. But with that, I will pass you over to Robert, who will take us through the company. I think. Robert?
Oh, there we go. Hello, everybody. Great to have a chance to meet you all. Thank you so much, Dorian and Rob. And I'm very excited to share the story of CloudDX with you. CloudDX is a digital healthcare company with offices in Canada and the United States. We are formerly a US company based in Brooklyn, New York, which is where I live. But most of the team and most of the technology comes from Canada, outside of Toronto. This is our 6th year in business, and we've now reached the point of scale. We have a very exciting last few months to share with you. And with that, I'm going to ask them to bring up my slides so I can begin telling you a little bit about what we do. Okay, outstanding. So, some very quick statistics. Company now has a headcount of a little under 40. We're currently staffing up, so that's changing rapidly. We're recruiting right now for across the board, from technology to manufacturing to sales and marketing. And the real team, the brain trust here, is this group of people. This is my 6th startup. I've been a serial entrepreneur most of my adult life. I've had a number of successful exits, one of reasonable size, but this is, of course, a labor of love, being an entrepreneur. CloudDX is a company that I've been involved with as founder, obviously. Previous to that, I ran a company, a listed company called BioSign Technologies as the CEO, and we created CloudDX by taking that company private. So I've actually been involved with the technology that we're talking about today for 10 years. A couple of important people on this page. Dr. Sunny Kohli is our Chief Medical Officer. He's also somebody you'll see in a lot of our promotional videos and media coverage. Fantastic physician, but also an entrepreneur and an amazing guy, former astronaut candidate. And we have a really great team when it comes to technology. Nick Mulder came to us from Shopify, where he created teams of hundreds of engineers. Sarah Ross Howe is the brains behind a lot of our technology, PhD candidate. And we have a good gender balance, good diversity balance as well. CloudDX has been recognized over the last nearly 6 years. But the most important award we've won is something called the Tricorder X Prize. And the Qualcomm Tricorder X Prize was a 3-year competition run by the X Prize Foundation in California. Many people have heard of the X Prize. They were instrumental in creating the private spaceflight industry. The Tricorder X Prize required us to create a working Star Trek medical tricorder, which meant that we had to create technology that could autonomously diagnose disease. It was really a data analysis problem. It's that technology that we're currently commercializing. So who's buying technology like that? As Rob mentioned when we launched the webinar today, everything in the medical world changed with the advent of COVID-19. Virtual care became the only way to deliver care, especially to older people, more vulnerable populations. And of course, that has naturally turbocharged our business. We've spent years perfecting a virtual care platform and launching it into both the Canadian and US markets with some additional work overseas and around the world, as you'll see. And we're responding very strongly to the COVID crisis and the COVID pandemic. In particular, our patient numbers have increased by 10x since February. And that growth is part of what's fueling our public listing plan. And of course, it's also part of what use of proceeds requirement, because growing this fast requires capital. But once COVID is out of the way, once the world has recovered from COVID, it doesn't mean the challenges go away. The largest single healthcare cost in the entire world is actually chronic disease. And the largest chronic diseases that kill the most people in the world are chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is like emphysema, and congestive heart failure. Those two diseases account for over 75% of healthcare spending in the world. It's literally trillions of dollars. Virtual care attacks those illnesses, improves outcomes, and dramatically lowers costs. That's what's driving the entire industry right now. It's both outcomes and costs. User experience is a third leg of that stool. Now, what does CloudDX do? I'm really excited to share this slide with you because we are actually a technology platform. Our system has a foundation of virtual machines, cloud-based analytic algorithms, and proprietary medical devices that gather very, very accurate data remotely from patients. That foundation has created a connected health business that's scaling now. This business is generating millions of dollars in revenue. It's up dramatically this year so far. But in addition to that connected health business, we have 4 other technology platforms stacked on top of that that are launching in the next 2 to 3 years. And I like the analogy of thinking of us as a commercial building. The ground floor, the first floor rather, is in business and generating revenue now. As each of these floors gets built out and begins to attract customers and build revenue, the entire building becomes extremely valuable. So I'm going to take you through what we do at each step. Our current solution we're in the market with today, generating revenue, is a connected health platform. It includes mobile apps that patients use to record their vital signs and interact with clinicians remotely. That includes telemedicine, two-way video, secure text messaging, surveys the patients answer about their symptoms, and of course, gathering that vital sign data that gives clinicians a clear picture of the patient's condition. The vital sign kit that we send to the patients is proprietary. These devices are either invented or curated by CloudDX, and we own a lot of IP in this area. So this kit goes out to the patient uses it in their home, they take their vital signs on a regular schedule, and that data is displayed on a clinical dashboard at the hospital or the doctor's office. The clinicians monitor the patients through this dashboard. There's a lot of services behind the scenes that are flagging and notifying clinicians when things change. So for example, if you're taking a COVID-19 survey and your symptoms change, you have shorter of breath, you're starting to show a fever, maybe you've lost your sense of taste and smell, you answer yes to those questions, the software automatically generates a notification to the clinician. They follow up with a video call, and now they can triage you remotely without having to bring you in, make a decision about whether you need to go to the hospital or whether you can stay at home and stay safe. All of this data flows into the electronic medical record platform. That's where clinicians need that data to be. And so that EMR integration is the final piece of the puzzle. One thing that I'll speak of later in talking about competition, we're the only company in our space that controls this entire flow from the patient's skin, all the way to the EMR. So remote patient monitoring, telemedicine, why does it work? What does it do for people? Well, it enables clinicians to take action sooner. When you have this remote data from the home, you have remote data from the patient, it means the patient is more engaged, but it also means you get early warning of changes, which means you can intervene faster, keep patients out of hospital, keep patients out of the doctor's office, out of the ER, treat them the most appropriate way, which in study after study after study has shown improves outcomes and lowers costs. And those two aspects of virtual care are the magic bullets: better outcomes, lower costs. So as I mentioned, this is the technology we're currently in the market with, but these are the technologies that are coming out in the next little while. We have a new version of our proprietary blood pressure monitor. This is called PulseWave, the very advanced pulse wave analyzer. It's been tested in the laboratory, in the cath lab, against an arterial catheter for accuracy. It's one of the most accurate cuffs in the world. We have a wearable device called Vitality that came straight out of our tricorder competition with Qualcomm. This is a continuous vital sign monitor that also measures blood pressure continuously, which is nearly unique in the world. We have a software app that analyzes cough sounds. And when we're done with this webinar, we'll invite you to watch a video that's just been released, a documentary, about how this cough analysis software is being trialed and tested in Mozambique right now. First for tuberculosis, but of course there's a lot of interest in pivoting this technology to see if it can diagnose COVID. We have technology that can actually detect medication in the body. And we're working with Microsoft on augmented reality user interfaces. So these technologies all build on our data platform. This fills our data platform with data that we can continue to analyze using machine learning in order to predict what is actually going to happen to patients. So let me take you through this in a little more detail, because these technologies are what fills up that 5-story building. The really key factor with this device, PulseWave 2, is it's the only blood pressure cuff in the world that measures breathing rate using proprietary technology. When you take a reading with PulseWave 2, it takes about a minute. We not only get your blood pressure, we get your heart rate, we also get your respiration rate. Doctors are desperate for this information to help treat COVID patients. Obviously, breathing rate and oxygen level are the two factors that are most diagnostic right now for COVID-19. This device is being rushed into service right now. It's ready for production. It's going into Health Canada licensing and FDA clearance. And we just received the $2 million grant to speed up in-house manufacturing of this device in our location in Canada, outside of Toronto, Ontario. So we have a lot of funding behind getting this to the market. It will be ready for market by September. Right behind that is our continuous vital sign monitor. So the wrist cuff is a spot monitor. It takes a reading in 1 minute, delivers results. You don't wear it all the time. You don't wear it every day. You just take the readings, then go on with your life. But this remote monitor is like an ICU in a necklace. It goes around the patient's neck, and it's used to monitor continuous blood pressure as well as all of these other core vital sign functions. This device allows clinicians to take a patient that would normally be in ICU and keep them isolated in a ward outside of ICU with very similar levels of telemetry, and again, expands the ability to treat patients with COVID-19. This device is right behind PulseWave 2 in its clearance pathway. So we expect this device to be cleared in the market in 2020. The third piece of tech that's almost finished and almost ready, my goodness, that's strange. This is our cough analysis software. What this software does is it records the sound of a patient coughing. It sends that sound signal to the cloud, where algorithms analyze the sound of a cough in order to diagnose up to 7 respiratory illnesses. In Mozambique, we're focused on tuberculosis. But with COVID-19, we're really looking at pneumonia. So those are the 2 most important respiratory illnesses that cough analysis software is being validated for right now. The clearance pathway for this depends on its use. It depends on how it's actually decided, how clinicians decide to use it. It could be in market as early as Q2 of next year. Building on all this data is technology that we've created called medication detection. What this really means is that we analyze all the signals that these products bring in, all the signals that we get on the vital signs, and those signals are high enough quality, they're a high enough frequency that we have proven in the lab that we can detect when a patient's taken medication. This directly addresses the $600 billion per year medication non-adherence problem. Nearly half of medications that are prescribed around the world are not actually taken by the patient. Many reasons for that, but the ability to detect that a patient is taking their medication and then detect their downstream efficacy of that medication is extremely powerful for drug discovery. It's extremely powerful for drug delivery and for treatment of diseases like tuberculosis. This is tech that we've patented. We have more than 1 granted patent on this technology. All of this leads then to a giant database with millions and millions of readings in it that we can analyze for predictive patterns. So as our pool of data grows and as our data lake increases, it becomes easier and easier for machine learning algorithms to detect what might happen to a patient that shows a certain pattern. These predictive analytics are going to be extremely powerful. We are working with one of the most esteemed population health research institutes in the world at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, on a 40,000 patient definitive study to prove the ability to predict outcomes using these very high frequency signals that our proprietary technology gathers. I don't have to tell you, obviously, around the world that COVID-19 is generating incredible markets for telehealth and telemedicine. Telemedicine stocks in the public markets are through the roof. Telemedicine companies are raising money left and right. And COVID-19 is driving a lot of that. But as we spoke of earlier, that's not the only problem that remote technology and virtual care solves. So just on the reimbursement side alone, not thinking about private pay, just on purely on reimbursement and purely in the North American market, not including Europe, Asia, China, Africa. This is a total of a $32 billion total available market. And that's driven by these reimbursement codes from US Medicare and the fact that over 50 million Americans qualify for service under those codes. It's a virtually limitless market right now with no clear market leader. We're driving into that market with a number of different targeted marketing campaigns. In the Canadian space, we're the leader now, and we actually do relationship marketing in Canada. We have relationships across the country. We're financed by the Canadian medical community and the Canadian Medical Association. So our ties to doctors in Canada are very, very tight, which has led to an explosion in business there right now. Also in the US, we have very, very strong relationships with the American Medical Association and with groups from California to Florida to Arkansas to Texas. However, targeted marketing for these providers of Medicare and chronic care management is where a lot of the money that we're currently raising will be invested in the next 6 months. We're staffing up a sales and marketing team to dramatically increase our throughput on our sales funnel to these providers because they're currently shopping for our technology. Our financial results have been very, very strong. At the end of 2018, we came out of R&D mode and moved into full commercialization and saw a growth of nearly 1,000%, over 1,000% growth to 2019. We're still seeing that kind of growth into 2020. And we can talk about that and answer questions around that as we go along. This increase in revenue is being driven by these reimbursement codes. So in 2019, the US Medicare system began reimbursing for remote patient monitoring. As of 2020, driven by COVID-19, across the board, telemedicine is now being reimbursed at the same level as in-person doctor visits. So this taps into an enormous pool of reimbursement funding for a telemedicine platform that also delivers accurate vital signs. And this is driving a lot of our growth. The question always comes up, who is the competition? We compete on 3 playing fields here. When it comes to the devices that we've invented, these are the companies that make standard vital sign devices. A&D Medical is one of the most well-used devices in telemedicine, so is Nonin for pulse oximetry. But our advantage is, first of all, we control the entire device ecosystem. So we invented them, we're now beginning to manufacture them in-house ourselves, and that gives us control over quality and keeps our IP in-house, which is very, very important for us. So we have an advantage in quality, we have an advantage in features, and we have an advantage in cost. When it comes to companies that take devices and deliver telemedicine, our advantage is also that we control the entire user experience. That gives us 2 potent weapons against these companies who we beat over and over again in RFPs for giant multi-million-dollar contracts. First of all, we're closer to the patient, we're closer to the clinician. We're just smaller, more nimble. So we deliver a solution that is designed around the users. And that is extremely important to the users, which of course drives sales. The other point here is that we verticalize our supply chain, and it again gives us a cost advantage. But you can't also overlook customer service. We also win these RFPs and we win competitive bids whenever new clients get a chance to talk to existing clients, because our existing clients rave about us. We have very, very high customer satisfaction scores. In one academic study, we got a net promoter score from clinicians of 82. And this customer feedback has driven at least 2 large contracts so far this year against some very, very big competitors. So frankly, we're crushing it, and we intend to continue doing that out there in the world. So now we're getting to the end here. The reality is we've been generating revenue in 2019, over $1 million this year already. We're looking at least 3 times that. And a lot of that is due to COVID, but also what's coming after COVID. We've won the awards. We've created the platform. We've proven over and over again product market fit. And the company's still quite tightly held. I mentioned too, there was a question earlier from Rob and Dorian, just on from one of the other folks about the founders. And so the founders currently own a little over 1/3 of the company, but there's one private equity investor on our board who also owns about 19%. So together, the board essentially controls the company. The investor base is private. We don't have any venture capital. The company has been funded from the medical community, as I mentioned. And so our investors are our customers. They're almost universally doctors or referrals and friends of doctors. And we've raised a large amount of money over the last 6 years, 5.5 years, over $15 million US from that source. We're the only company in the history of the Canadian Medical Association that the association itself has invested in. So we have a lot of credibility with the medical community. So with that, I'm going to stop and see about questions. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Robert. There's one question on the screen, and then I'll pass it over to Martin and Riani, who I'm sure have questions of their own. So there's a question from Jake Klaas, who's asking, does CloudDX compete against the likes of GoForward, shooting to replace the need for HMOs, PPOs, etc., through telehealth and limited office locations, as well as medical devices?
That's a great question. We would not consider GoForward a competitor. We would consider them a customer, or potential customer. We haven't done business with them yet, but they do have some pretty sexy tech that they use in their advertisements. The kind of technology we're developing is the kind of technology that enables and empowers businesses like GoForward. So I would actually love an introduction if you know somebody who is on the team there, because I think that we could actually help improve their efficiency, reduce their costs, and give them some additional technology to play with.
Okay, and sorry, just one quick question before I pass it over to the panel. Question from, well, before that, there's someone who's under the name of the Lion Whisperer says, wow, this is amazing. Thank you, Robert. But there's also a question from Altus Victor, who says, predictive analytics in the medical field allows for AI to close the entire treatment loop and for data collection to be much, much more accurate and also to improve treatment options. What do you see as the long-term, and it finishes that, but what do you see in the future?
And that's a great question. It comes up all the time, and you know, it's that question of do you expect artificial intelligence to replace doctors? And the answer is no in the short term. In the long term, it's a little more complicated. So in the short term, clinicians will always be, you know, well, at least in the short term, be part of the treatment loop, both because regulators are not yet fully up to speed on how they want to regulate artificial intelligence in medicine, but also because the patient needs that human touch. So we consider our technology clinical decision support. It empowers the clinician, it gives them superpowers, it lets them do their job at the highest level of their license, it improves their workflow, and frankly, it can, if it's used properly, improve their quality of life. It's one of those pillars of the quintuple aim to improve healthcare, is improving the work conditions of clinicians, which, if you talk to anybody in the medical space, they'll tell you it's not ideal. A lot of clinicians are burning out, they hate their jobs, they'd rather do anything else. Technology should empower them. In the long term, AI has tremendous, obviously, potential. The Tricorder X Prize competition allowed us to become a leader in that concept, because what our tricorder actually did to win the X Prize was autonomously diagnose disease without a human in the loop, 15 different diseases. So we've proven that we can do that. We have the IP to do that. Now it's a question of market acceptance. It's a question of intended use and outcomes and workflow. There's no question, though, that just like in the banking industry and in the investment industry, mathematical models and algorithms will become more and more and more a part of the experience, both on the clinician side and on the patient side. And we intend to be a big part of that story.
Martin, Vianney, could I pass it over to you guys? I'm sure you got questions to ask.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Vianney speaking. So in fact, I see Adam has also asked a very similar questions about, do you have any plans in expanding to emerging markets or licensing your technology to partners in emerging markets?
We are very keen to work with partners around the world. Licensing our technology is something we have done on occasion. We would be interested in having those conversations. One of the things we know for sure in the medical space is it's very challenging to try and reinvent every single wheel. You can't do it all yourself. It literally takes not just a village, it takes a medium-sized town to deliver healthcare effectively. So interoperability, the ability to work with other platforms, to work with health management systems, electronic medical record systems, to integrate other devices that also give us great data. This is all part of the platform, and it's all part of what we're looking forward to in the future. So the answer is a qualified yes. Definitely, we're looking for partnerships, and you don't dominate the globe without working with the local experts. So we'd be interested in having that conversation for sure.
Robert, this is Martin. But it was a fascinating presentation, by the way, very impressive what you've achieved. One of the questions I have for you is, you seem to be able to process a lot of data without using blood or tissue samples. And I'm kind of blown away about how much you managed to achieve without doing that. How much does the fact that you cannot sort of really get into the level of blood and tissue restrict your ability to really do a lot more? And do you have plans for maybe expanding your platform to be able to do that in future?
That is a great question. So first of all, to start off with the target market, again, COPD, CHF, the two by far largest single problems in healthcare. Managing those chronic conditions doesn't require us to use blood or tissue samples. Diabetes is a little different. The ability to integrate a glucometer is part of our platform. We don't make glucometers ourselves, but we work with glucometer companies, and we get that data from the glucose meter for diabetes. So that does go into our system, goes into our platform. We do have a little bit of experience with fluid samples. Going back to the tricorder, the device we won the X Prize with, in order to win that competition, we partnered with a group at Stanford University in California. They had invented a giant magnetic resistance analyzing lab on a chip. It's a tiny little chip. It had 81 slots on it. You put samples on there, and it would literally, in 5 minutes, identify any analyte on there at extremely high accuracy. That fed into our tricorder model and allowed us to diagnose diseases like anemia and mononucleosis using fluid assays. So that technology and IP exists. It's an entirely different space. That's another startup. That's another 50 million invested to get it to market. But what we've designed the platform to do is accept data from those solutions. So as point of care diagnostics and as PCR systems and fluidics and the various different companies that are out there right now inventing different ways to track DNA and RNA and to diagnose different conditions to that, we're already set up and designed to work with that data, and we can integrate that data immediately because it's built into the platform. Trying to also stand up that kind of technology beside the technology we have now would be a 4 to 5 year from here problem, but it's certainly something that we would look into once we've perfected the devices I'm showing you here. They're all fully in the market. So on that, back to this analogy here, once the building's completely built out, all flight floors are full, they're all making money, then the building beside that would be the Fluidics building. That's how we would have to look at it.
Okay, that's a great answer. The other question I would have for you is, this is a very hot area at the moment in medicine, and obviously you've got people like Apple and Google and GE Healthcare are very keen to aggressively take as much of this field as they can early on with their virtually unlimited resources. Obviously, the fact that you're a small startup company and you've got a lot of great IP and some smart people helps you compete. But how do you see the sector developing with those monsters in the field, with their huge checkbooks competing against you? How do you stay nimble and keep ahead of them?
Well, that's a question we've been asked over and over since we founded the company, and we have had conversations with all the companies you've mentioned. When you think about Apple and Samsung, they come from the consumer electronics side. So they have realized time and again that it's very, very challenging to try and take a consumer device like an Apple Watch and make it into a medical device. They've tried that with the ECG and so on, and it generally doesn't work very well. It's not scaling right now. Acquiring a company like ours and trying to plug it into that system for Apple or Samsung will be a challenge. That doesn't mean they wouldn't want to license our technology or integrate with it as a platform play. So those conversations are ongoing. Not at a high level. We haven't talked to Apple for a couple of years now, actually. Other companies you mentioned, though, are definitely companies that we're interested in chatting with. GE Healthcare in particular. Again, I can't make any promises there. I can tell you that they know us well, and we have some very interesting ongoing conversations. We have existing giant partners. One of our partners is Air Liquide, which is, I think, the largest or second largest oxygen company in the world. They are huge leaders in both oxygen therapy, sleep apnea, and CPAP machines. And they're a customer. They're already adopting our technology to monitor patient oxygen remotely. And they're extremely excited about what our technology can do to empower their entire platform, hopefully around the world. So we've launched business with them in Canada already. It's one of our most exciting new contracts this year. And we expect that relationship to really grow. So, I mean, there's two ways that this could go. Obviously, we list the company, and as these partnerships drive business, helps our whole enterprise grow. Is an acquisition a possibility? Of course it is. There's a point where you're out competing a large company so much that they really have no choice but to buy you. And that wouldn't be a bad thing for us either.
Okay, good answers. Thank you, Robert.
Pleasure.
So, Robert, sorry, Vianney, carry on.
No. I was just going to read some of the questions that have come up. I'm not sure if you were going to do that.
Please go ahead.
There's a very interesting question here from Musi, which reads, noting that poverty is often an underlying condition in the choices that poor people have, does the intention to use big data and policy advice for governments in the developing world? And secondly, what incentives similar to Vitality, I imagine you referred to Discover Vitality, would tech use to give incentives to clients similar to that of Vitality post-diagnosis? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Vitality, which is basically a product or service that incentivizes people to lead better lives. So I think this question is really directed at what interventions, if any, are directed at engaging governments at policy level.
Big questions, excellent questions. So I think, there's two parts of our, okay, good. There's two parts of our solution that work together. So we get a lot of data from an individual person on a sort of personal health level, personalized medicine, for tracking your vital signs, your survey answers, starting to predict your outcomes, sort of a very deep personalized experience for each client. But when you expand that across thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of patients, it becomes a population health powerhouse, really a population health data lake. The ongoing study in Mozambique around tuberculosis is a great example of how the government hopes to use our technology to drive better outcomes and empower patients, because there's lots of social challenges with tuberculosis all over the world, not just in the developing world, everywhere in the world. It's there's a stigma attached to that disease. Patients don't want to get tested. They don't want people to know they have tuberculosis because they'll be shunned and they'll lose their jobs and who knows. So the ability to test the patient with their phone and get an accurate screen of whether they're positive for tuberculosis so they can immediately begin treatment privately is an absolute game changer, not just on the tech side, but on the social side. That's true of some of our other technologies too. As you begin to help people diagnose conditions earlier, they can get treatment faster. It drives better outcomes and reduces costs, but some of those outcomes are also psychosocial. And we're extremely excited about that aspect of what we do. I'm 100% familiar with the Vitality model that's mentioned here in the question, but in Canada, I can tell you that governments are using our solution from the far north, in the Yukon Territory in Canada, where we're the sole provider of digital healthcare to the entire Yukon Territory, through the province of Alberta, which just signed a contract with us as their sole provider. We're very excited about that. Alberta is the second largest health system in North America, second to Kaiser Permanente, and we won that bid against some very steep competition. So we believe that very much the data we generate both benefits clinicians and individual patients, but also benefits society and government. And we hope to continue those conversations across the world.
And then, how do you address the challenge of data ownership versus rights of use in contexts where there are strong advocates for data being owned by patients and doctors, and yet wanting to use that to improve your system?
We address those questions with every single contract we sign. We go through multiple layers of privacy and security analysis. And the whole world is sort of trying to get their head around how to manage data ownership going forward. But the rules and regulations around medical data ownership are actually quite clear. They have been clear since the day of the paper chart. Doctors are the custodians of that data. We support that custody. The patient is the owner of that data. Depending on the jurisdiction, they have direct ownership or they have indirect ownership. The highest sort of, bar in the world of privacy and security right now is in Europe with GDPR, the General Data Protection Rules. And although we don't currently do business in Europe, we've designed our security and privacy protections around GDPR compliance. So, the real key is to just very clearly understand the rules of the road, where you're operating and in which country you're operating, and meet those regulations. we're an ISO certified company. Our entire quality management system is ISO audited every year, and we meet extremely high bar for quality, security, and data protection. So we very much have our arms around that.
Robert, there's another question from Adam Craker, who's asking, would you consider licensing your technology to partners in emerging markets while you focus on growth in your target markets?
I think we touched on that. I think the answer is yes. We would definitely consider that. We're interested in partnerships all over the world.
And then a question from Adrian DeFay. How does the pulse wave 2 measure the breathing rate? And isn't the saturation of peripheral oxygen in the blood the yardstick?
So that's a great question. The answer is a little bit special sauce, but pulse wave 2 is a pulse wave analyzer. So what this cuff does, it goes around the wrist. I'm not sure if people can see me, but here's an example of pulse wave 1. Whoops, there's the camera. There it is. Pulse wave 1 is the predecessor to pulse wave 2. The wrist cuff that goes around the wrist, and we pick up this sphygmogram, or this pulse signal, from the radial artery. It's a very, very data-rich signal. There's over 4,000 data points that we gather in a 60-second reading. Some of that data has to do with the way that the blood and the circulatory system responds as your heart is pumping and as you're breathing. So the easiest non-technical way to answer that question is that there is a clear signal in the data that we gather in that 60-second reading using the cuff that has been clinically proven to accurately measure breathing rate. We also have a device that measures oxygen. So this is a device that we also make, and it's an oxygen meter as well. So these devices work together, the pulse ox and the blood pressure, and here we go. So this is my pulse oxygen on our mobile app. Patients absolutely love this because it just grabs it out of the air. It takes 20 seconds. You get a very accurate oxygen and heart rate reading. And this, of course, is a very powerful tool for both chronic diseases like COPD and very much COVID-19. This is one of the key reasons why we keep winning these giant contracts.
Welcome from Eric and Boma. Thank you for this presentation, Robert. It blows my mind to see the possibilities. For countries where the ratio of medical workers to patients is dramatically low, your offering will definitely and immediately make a difference. Were you able to quantify and measure the financial and medical impact of CloudDX on those economies?
Well, that's a good question. When you go back to the available market slide that I pointed out a little earlier, which I have, where did I put it? Bear with me 1 second while I find it. There we go. So this number of 32 billion for North America is obviously the entire total available market. If you scale that up across the world, it's over 100 billion. There's many different ways to attack digital healthcare. In developing countries, you're not going to necessarily see this $1,000 per patient per year annual recurring revenue kind of numbers, because frankly, the systems just don't support that. But they do support a capitated model. So the cost analysis software is a great example. The goal here is to license this technology to government. Government will make it available on smartphones across the entire country, potentially for free to citizenry, but they would then pay us an annual fee, whether the patient uses it or not, on a capitated basis. That in a country of several million people would be obviously several $million. Scale that up across all of the developing world, and as a software only offering, it will still be quite lucrative and quite profitable for CloudDX, and yet offer a treatment option for tuberculosis patients that is possibly 2 orders of magnitude less expensive than the current standard of care, which requires an actual physical swab and then a culture in a lab in order to